Hello, my name is Michael Kozak, and today I will be giving my IOC. I hope you enjoy. So, the text at hand is an extract taken from A Streetcar Named Desire, which is a play written by Tennessee Williams. The extract takes place just after Blanche's arrival to Elysian Fields, where the truth of her past has not yet been exposed. In the extract, Stanley already sees through Blanche's faked act of innocence and suspects that Stella and him had been swindled by Blanche's loss at Belle Reve. Stanley confronts Blanche rather forcefully, opening her trunk and then reading her personal letters without consent. She then gives him the papers from many firms which had made loads to the plantation and comments that it be fitting that all these papers should now be in his hands. Williams uses this extract in order to introduce the conflict between Blanche and Stanley and to also develop it. So the use of dialogue clearly shows the contrast in characteristics between Blanche and Stanley and works to develop the conflict between them. So Stanley's lower class background becomes apparent through the way he talks to Blanche. So quote on line 9, "What's them underneath?" His use of slang clearly indicates that he is very casual and not worried about formalities. Stanley is also unable to elaborate with his language, thus is confined to short sentences, further showing that his background is much more lower class compared to Blanche's and much more uneducated. The short sentence structure of his dialogue also shows his authoritarian nature. So, quote on line 12, "I'll have a look at them first." He doesn't care for Blanche's consent. He gives short, direct commands and establishes himself as the dominant figure. Blanche, on the other hand, speaks very differently. So, quote on line 6, "that I am upsonding with something." She talks with sophisticated language, indicating her higher class background. It is evident that she recognizes her superiority regarding social class, as seen when Stanley looks at her love letters. So, quote on line 13, "the touch of your hands insults them." She sees Stanley as inferior to her and undeserving to even touch anything that relates to her. It is evident that Stanley is also aware of the class difference that exists between himself and Blanche. Quote on line 14, "don't pull that stuff." He immediately shuts down any remarks made from Blanche that suggest her superiority and her class dominance. Stanley asserts his dominance physically and justifies it through male superiority, whereas Blanche indicates her superiority by showing her class dominance. This clash of egos really sets the foundation for the conflict that develops between Blanche and Stanley throughout the play. So Williams' use of stage directions and props also work to develop and foreshadow the conflict that exists between Stanley and Blanche. The stage directions in this extract especially highlight Stanley's violent nature towards Blanche. So, quote on line 10, "snatches them up." He does this when he sees Blanche's love letters, and it shows that he asserts physicality in order to be in control over her. This contrasts Blanche, who fights verbally instead of physically, as indicated by the stage directions. So, quote on line 11, "she speaks fiercely." The stage directions in this extract clearly indicate the contrast between Blanche and Stanley in terms of how they seek control over one another. When talking about her ex-husband, Blanche is described as looking, quote on line 24, faint with exhaustion. The death of her husband was a tragic event and is shown to have a physical impact on her. In this case, the stage directions show the reaction of Blanche when confronted with the reality of her past. They show that when she is unable to evade the reality of her situation and put on her fake character, she is left as a very weak and vulnerable person. The trunk is a prompt used as a symbol of Blanche's privacy. When handling the trunk, Stanley, quote on line 2, shoves it roughly open and begins to open up the compartments. This foreshadows the moment when Stanley begins to find out about the reality of Blanche's past and their conflict reaches a climax. Thus, the stage directions work to expose Stanley's physical nature and Blanche's unstable state, two characteristics that are ideal for conflict. This trunk is used as a symbol for Blanche's privacy, and it foreshadows Stanley's invasion of it. So the interrogative tone and the submissive tone of this extract highlights the conflict that exists between Blanche and Stanley. Throughout this extract, Stanley's dialogue consists mainly of questions regarding the loss of Bellerive. So quote on line 32, "Where's all the rest of them papers?" Because he questions the truth of Blanche's past multiple times in the extract, his tone is very interrogative. Blanche, on the other hand, begins to submit to his interrogation by opening up about her financial troubles with Bellerive and, quote, endowing Stanley with the letters. As she eventually gives in to Stanley at the end of the extract, we can see that her tone changes from superior, where she asserts her dominance from her class, to submissive. The interrogative tone of Stanley and the submissive tone of Blanche indicates their positions in the conflict. Stanley is the predator, whereas Blanche is the victim. Therefore, Williams uses tone in this extract in order to indicate the conflict between Blanche and Stanley by conveying Blanche as the victim submitting to the demands of Stanley. In conclusion, this extract is significant to the whole work because it really sets the foundation for the conflict that exists between Blanche and Stanley. The dialogue shows their clash of egos and conflict stemming from their class difference. Stage directions and props indicate Blanche's unstable state and foreshadows the climax of the conflict in the play. Tone is used to show the position of each character within their conflict. Blanche is the victim, whereas Stanley is the predator. Therefore, ultimately, Williams uses this extract as a means of highlighting and developing the strong conflict that exists between Blanche and Stanley. So that about wraps it up for my IOC. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.